Hello, I'm Anjuli, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can connect your .NET MAUI application to Microsoft Entra ID. First thing we need to do is register our application in Microsoft Entra Admin Center. And for that you have to go to entra.microsoft.com. And when you're here, you go to Identity, Applications, and App Registrations. Here you can click on New Registration, and you can choose a name for your app. And if you're using an external tenant, like I'm doing in this case, make sure you choose the top one. And you can leave the rest as it is and click Register. The next thing you have to do is go to Authentication. And here you have to add a platform configuration. So click on Add a Platform. Choose Mobile and Desktop Applications. And here you have to click on the last one. This is MSAL, Microsoft Authentication Library, then the client ID, the application ID of your app registration, and then the /auth. And this will redirect back to your .NET MAUI application after you have successfully logged in with Entra ID. Click Configure. The next thing you have to do is go to API permissions. And here you can see the user.read permission is added automatically. And that is added when I edited the platform configuration. But before we continue, we first have to grant admin consent, if you are the admin, of course. Click Yes. And now everything is set and we can go to Visual Studio to configure the code. For this video, I already created a .NET MAUI application called Recipes app. It just has one page, the main page, with two labels and a button. And when the button is clicked, it goes to the onLoginClick method here. And this is where we will add the code to connect with Entra ID. But before that, the first thing we have to do is install the Microsoft Authentication Library. So right click on your project and click on Manage NuGet Packages and search for microsoft.identity.client and click Install. To connect with Microsoft Entra ID, the Microsoft Identity Client Library requires some configuration. So I will create a static class which will store this configuration. I know using static classes is not best practice, but it's easier to use in this demo. I'll just call it entraconfig and make this a public static class. We need the following properties. We need the authority. We need a client ID. We need to define the scopes. And for iOS, we need to define the iOS keychain security group. And for Android, we need to define a parent window object. These are all the properties you need to connect with Entra ID with Android or with iOS. First thing we need to do is to find the tenant name. So if we go back to Entra ID and go to Identity Overview, click on Overview again. And here you can find the primary domain, which is in this case everything before the .onmicrosoft.com. We have to copy this and put it here. This is specifically the URL for the external tenant. When you're not using an external tenant, it is another URL, and I will add the link to the documentation where you can find this below. Next thing we have to fill in is the client ID, which is the ID that is assigned to my app registration in Microsoft Entra ID. So if we go back to app registrations and find our test MAUI application, here you can find the application client ID. So you have to copy this and paste it here. The next thing we have to define are the scopes. And I will make this an array to make it easier. We have to define two scopes here, OpenID and offline access. The next thing is the iOS keychain security group. By default, you can write com.microsoft.edelcache, but you can also define your own keychain security group. I will add a link in the description where you can find more information on what this is and how you can set it up. And the last thing we have to do is to assign the parent window. And this is only for Android. When the Android application starts up, we have to assign the main activity to this parent window so that we can redirect back from the browser to our .NET MAUI application. So let's go to Platforms and then click on Android and click on Main Activity. And here we have to assign it. So we should override the onCreate method. And because it's a static, we can access it everywhere. If you don't configure this, it won't be able to redirect back. But we're not done yet for the Android configuration. The next thing we have to do is to create another activity, which is called the MSAL activity. Click on Add, New Item, and you can choose class. Now we'll call this MSAL activity. Make it public and make it implement the browser tab activity interface. Above the class declaration, we have to add the following code. We cannot use the property here, so we have to copy it from our settings. So this is all the configuration we need for Android. Let's write the code for logging in and then we can test if it works. Let's go back to the main page.xaml.cs, where our login clicked method is defined. First we need to define a public client application builder. Of course you have to add the using, and in the create method you have to pass the client ID. Here you also have to define the authority, which is the URL of our tenant. We also have to define the redirect URI, which is the redirect URI that's configured in Entra ID. You can copy it from there, but in short it's MSAL, and then the client ID, and then /auth, and then add the build method. Now we can use this public client application to make a connection with Entra ID. This public client application builder has a method that's called acquire token interactive. And this will open the window for which you can see a login page and log in, and then it will send you an auth result in return. And this auth result contains a token, but also contains the things like a user email address or its ID in Entra ID or its name or any other attributes that you configure. With this method, you have to pass the scopes and we have to execute this. And to make it visible that it actually worked, let's change the text of my label so we can see it. I called my label name label, and I will just set the text to login successful. Oh wait, I realized I forgot something. For Android you also have to bind the parent window. Now we can properly test this. So this is the app that I created, and if we click on login, it will go to the browser. And here you can click on no account create one. And you can see it successfully redirected back to my application, and now we are logged in. One thing I forgot to mention, if you're using an external tenant and you want your users to be able to create an account, you have to have a user flow created in your tenant. I can show you where it is. If you go to Entra ID and click on external identities, you can find user flows here. And you can create a new user flow. And here you can also choose the identity providers. For ease of use, I will just pick this. And here you can collect attributes. And these are the attributes that I was talking about earlier that you can get in the auth result back from Entra ID so that you can use it in your application. So after you've chosen a name, you can click create, and then you have to add your application to it. So after this is created, you click on your new user flow, click on applications, add an application, and search for the test MAUI that I've created. But again, this is only necessary if you're using an external tenant and you want your users to be able to create their own account. If you don't want this, or you're not using an external tenant, you have to register your users in Entra ID and then they can log in. Let's go back to the app. Now let's set up the iOS part of this. So let's get started by configuring what we need to configure to also make this work on iOS. And we will bump into some errors, but I'm going to do this on purpose so you can see how you can fix this. First thing we have to do is to tell the public client application builder that we want to configure the iOS keychain access group. So after the with authority method, we add another method called with iOS keychain security group and reference the one we defined in our config. And we have to add an entitlements.plist. Easiest way to do this is to go to platforms and then iOS, and then copy the info.plist, and then change its name to entitlements. If you open this, it will show you a whole list of entitlements you can choose from, and we have to click on keychain. And here we have to add the same that we configured in our Entra config. Now let's test this for my iOS device. I will change this to remote device because I'm connected to my MacBook. So the first exception you can encounter is this. Like I said, I want to show you what can go wrong, so you know how to fix this. So how to fix this is you go to your project file, and in this case I only want to deploy to Android and iOS, so I'll remove this one and I will try it again. And this is the next exception you can find. Provisioning profiles are something Apple specific because Apple wants to know which devices you are using to develop apps on. I will not go into detail on how you can configure this provisioning profile, but I will add links in the description so you can find out how to configure this for yourself. And it's very good to know that you need to have an Apple developer account. Now we can test it again. And now it will start my application on my iPhone simulator. And we can try the login. And after I'm signed in, I'm successfully redirected back to my iOS application. So now we got it working for both apps, Android and iOS, which is fairly simple. So this is what I wanted to show you. I am aware that I'm only showing you iOS and Android. That's because this was most requested. If you do want to have a video where you can implement this on Windows or macOS, let me know in the comments and I will try to make a video about that as well. Thank you for watching this video, like and subscribe if you liked it, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye!